Right now, Joe Biden is the most spoken about person in the world.
Many people feel that Joe Biden is looking like a man really feeling his age now, and that is beginning to be an embarrassment for him, for the US, and for the Democrats.
I mean, he's beginning to look as though the cognitive sort of side of his nature is just disappearing.
But these are not the headlines the president has always endured.
I used to laugh, and now I'm angry. I'm angry that people think it is acceptable, be it family or Democrats, to put a man who has spent 50 years giving his heart and soul to American politics, patently, through no fault of his own, he's not up to it, is he?
What are his inner circle, his wife and his family, thinking, putting this poor man, who clearly is frail and not in grasp of all of his faculties, through this charade that he can be a president in the future, let alone the future now?
How did we go from this?
This is my first overseas trip as President of the United States. I'm heading to the G7, then to the NATO ministerial, and then to meet with Mr. Putin to let him know what I want him to know.
To this.
Russia will not prevail in this war. Ukraine will prevail in this war. And now I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it.
The man with the most powerful job in the world has become a shadow of his former self, dwindling before our eyes.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
Now facing a galvanised Republican Party following the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, and in the face of criticism of his cognitive abilities, is Joe Biden's time up? And does he even have a say? This is the rise and decline of Joe Biden. Biden, the Senate years.
They gave a surprise party yesterday for Joe Biden, who will make history because of his age when he takes his seat in the new Senate.
I expect these fellows are going to eventually judge me on my merit, not on my age.
In 1972, Joe Biden's energy and relatability secured him a Senate seat representing Delaware. It was a shock win for the 30-year-old who had minimal campaign funds and only limited experience in politics, having only served in city council. He was the 7th youngest person to be selected into the Senate and was sworn into the role only a few weeks after his wife and daughter had died in a car accident. Joe Biden officially became a senator while sitting next to a hospital bed while his 2 sons, Hunter and Beau, were recovering from the car accident. For 36 years, Joseph Robinette Biden served in that role, having been re-elected into it 6 times. During Joe Biden's long stint in the Senate, he was known for creating many federal crime laws, including the Violence Against Women Act. His time as a chairman and ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and his many interactions with world leaders.
34-year-old Senator Joseph Biden of Delaware believes the debates between Carter and President Ford starting next Thursday could determine to a great extent the outcome of the presidential election. As a Catholic, do you feel that Governor Carter is going to be pretty extensively damaged among the Catholic voters by his abortion stand?
No, I don't. I don't think his abortion stand is going to cost him in the Catholic community.
Why not?
Because I don't think the Catholic community is unified in their position among themselves. And secondly, we've tended to be very tolerant of people who legitimately and honestly have a different point of view.
It seems to me if you can speak, you're at a liability in the Democratic Party anymore. It seems to me you've all become heartless technocrats. It seems to me that you forget that what happens is we have never as a party moved this nation by 14-point position papers and 9-point programs. It seems to me that when we got involved in the civil rights movement, Frank, nobody asked Martin Luther King what his legislative agenda was. He marched to change attitudes.
And I sadly predict, Mr. President, that this is going to be one of the bitterest, dirtiest presidential campaigns we will have seen in modern times.
Joe Biden has a very long history, over 50 years in politics, and was perceived as a very successful senator, a leader of the Democratic Party, someone who had run for president but unsuccessfully, chair of the Judiciary Committee, and of course, somewhat experienced in both domestic and foreign policies. Does have one blemish on his record, being part of that disastrous hearing for the nomination of Clarence Thomas under the administration of George H.W. Bush. And that is a stain on his record that survives to the present.
He was a figure of some moral clarity. I remember that despite him going on about his sort of pro-Irish roots, he was incredibly pro the United Kingdom during the Falklands conflict. I remember very firmly a video of him speaking very clearly for the conservative British government under Margaret Thatcher and the moral purpose of the task force that was sent to relieve the Falkland Islands from a dictatorial junta in Argentina. So he had that kind of thing going for him. And then I think that he had the first of his difficulties with the truth when he copied to large extent lines from speeches by former Labour Party leader, British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock, and lifted these lines up, and that blew up his first presidential campaign.
Vice President Biden. Joe Biden formally declared his candidacy for the 1988 presidential race on June 9, 1987. By September, he had withdrawn from the race, blaming the exaggerated shadow of his past mistakes as the reason. Joe Biden had another swing at the presidency when he declared his run for the Oval Office 20 years later in 2007. While he failed to draw on the support of Americans, he took up the second best job when he officially became Barack Obama's running mate, where the two later went on to win the 2008 presidential election.
In this country, we rise or fall as one nation, as one people. Let's resist the temptation to fall back on the same partisanship and pettiness and immaturity that has poisoned our politics for so long. And while the Democratic Party has won a great victory tonight, we do so with a measure of humility and determination to heal the divides that have held back our progress.
Nelson Mandela said, "A good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination." He inspired us. He challenged us to do better. He was a good man. It's going to be a heavy lift. These are difficult economic times right now in terms of budgets, but the president's made it clear that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that the Corps is fully funded, that we have, FEMA has what it needs. If Russia undermines these elections on Sunday, we must remain resolute in imposing greater cost on Russia. And we must be equally resolute in reinvesting in the NATO alliance. We have another Republican candidate who's been my friend for 32 years. But he's the same, he's telling us the same thing. He's making the same commitments. This time he says it will be different. It really will. He says this time, country's going to put before party, that there's going to be a change in tone, that we're going to reach across the aisle, there's going to change the Republican Party. I love how Republican nominees are always going to change the Republican Party. He's going to change how Washington works. Well, folks, we've seen that movie before. And you know from experience, the sequel is always worse than the original.
He's not going to go down as one of the great senators or great vice presidents, although it's hard to be a great vice president. But he was very well respected among the American people and within the party.
Joe Biden's popularity serving as Barack Obama's vice president no doubt helped his popularity amongst voters. But could that momentum carry through if Biden himself decided to run for the top job?
He was seen as a kind of elder statesman ready for one more big job than, 15 years ago when Barack Obama chose him as his running mate. And even then he was characterized by a series of gaffes and mistakes. I think there's one incident where he says that someone in an audience should stand up so that they can clap this person. But the reason they wanted to applaud and clap this person was because they were paraplegic in a wheelchair and therefore couldn't stand up. These are the sorts of gaffes that you don't want a vice president one heartbeat away from the biggest job in the world making. And again, that was many years before he even then became president and took on this job. So I think perhaps the decline has been a fairly slow, steady one from someone who had such a meteoric rise so early.
Biden's run for the presidency. After a turbulent few years for America, while the Trump administration was in power, Joe Biden officially declared he was running for president in April 2019.
I believe history will look back on 4 years of this president and all he embraces as an aberrant moment in time. But if we give Donald Trump 8 years in the White House, he will forever and fundamentally alter the character of this nation, who we are, and I cannot stand by and watch that happen.
The presidential campaign season during 2020 looked very different with the emergence of COVID-19. It meant fewer rallies, a lot less public appearances, Zoom conferences, and disputes over whether the presidential debates were breaching health protocols. The slimmed-down campaign season was a success for the Democratic Party, as it was less grueling on the then 78-year-old. Critics and Republicans would argue Joe Biden campaigned from the basement, but his presence on the stage looked a lot stronger than it would by 2024.
But it's here. And the decisions Democrats make all across America in the next few days will determine what this party stands for, what we believe, and what we'll get done. If Democrats nominate me, I believe we can beat Donald Trump.
We choose hope over fear, unity over division, truth over lies, and science over fiction. This is the United States of America. There has never, ever been a time, literally, when we as a nation have set our mind to accomplish something, we've been unable to do it when we've done it together. And then we got another senator, one of the wealthiest men in America, who had his own problems but barely got elected to the United States Senate, Rick Scott in Florida. And he started running negative ads in Iowa against Joe Biden. Now I wonder why he's doing that. I mean, all of a sudden, this is a guy from Florida who's going to have trouble hanging on to his seat, and he's running ads in Iowa against Joe Biden. Well, I tell you, it's nice to be loved by so many people. You know? The power is literally in your hands. Unlike any time in my career, one state can chart the course, not just for the next 4 years, but for the next generation. By electing John and the Reverend, you can make an immediate difference in your own lives, the lives of the people all across this country, because their election will put an end to the block in Washington on that $2,000 stimulus check. That money will go out the door immediately. Tell people who are in real trouble. Think about what it will mean to your lives. My fellow Americans, yesterday once again proved that democracy is the heartbeat of this nation. Just as it has been the heartbeat of this nation for 2 centuries. And even in the face of a pandemic, more Americans voted this election than ever before in American history. Over 150 million people cast their votes. I think that's just extraordinary. And if we had any doubts, we shouldn't have any longer about a government of, by, and for the people. It's very much alive in America. Here, the people rule. Power can't be taken or asserted. It flows from the people. And it's their will that determines who will be the President of the United States, and their will alone. And now, after a long night of counting, it's clear that we're winning enough states to reach 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. I'm not here to declare that we've won, but I am here to report that when the count is finished, we believe we will be the winners.
President Joe Biden. The 2020 election saw the highest voter turnout by percentage since 1900. Joe Biden received more than 81 million votes, the most a candidate has received in an election.
This is America's day. This is democracy's day. The people, the will of the people has been heard. and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
With the Biden administration having been sworn into office, expectations for the Democratic Party were high after a divisive last 4 years, especially after the January 6 insurrection. While the Biden administration worked to deliver on campaign promises surrounding healthcare, getting COVID-19 under control, putting the US on course to reach net zero by 2050, Joe Biden was met with a challenge: how he would front the stage without making a blunder, and in turn, how he and the White House would avoid the media's scrutiny for it. Practically straight into his first term as president, the Biden gaffes became political ammunition for the Republican Party.
They want to undo what they finally got done. And then what we finally got done is to make up for it. They want to give power back to Big Pharma. Start off with 2 words: made in America. Made in America.
We're going to seize their yachts, their luxury homes, and other ill-begotten gains of Putin's kleptocracy. Kleptocracy and the guys who are the kleptocracies. But these are bad guys.
Voter concerns surrounding Joe Biden's age and ability to run the country grew more consistent in polling. By August 2023, a nationwide poll found 70% of Americans found Joe Biden was too old to serve for 4 more years, which included 69% of Democratic voters.
Suppose you could have said, I told you so, but Joe Biden's not turning out to be quite the full ticket and not quite the president that everybody thought he was going to be.
My grandfather would tell me when I walked out the door in North Washington Avenue in Scranton. I'm Pittsburgh, and I really mean it. Instead of importing foreign products, I'm exporting for their products. The United States of America, there's nothing beyond our capacity. Nothing. If we do it together.
And reach agreements which will affect the lives of generations to come. You are in a position of extraordinary power.
Do you think he lasts the term? I mean, it's almost unlikely now that he's going to get a second term, but do you think he will finish out the first one?
I mean, yeah, there's not a second term, and I think even Democrats would tell you that from the beginning. But I think it's going to be one to watch. He seems to have some form of cognitive decline. I'm not a doctor. I don't want to assess what that is, but there's something not right there. And I know that they'll do their very best to keep him through the entire term, but he's going to oversee, I think, what will be a pretty devastating midterm election.
Imagine what we can do next. 4 more years. Pause. 4 more years. 4 more years. 4 more years.
Joe Biden seeks re-election.
I give you my word as a Biden, I would not be running again if I didn't believe with all my heart and soul I can do this job. Because quite frankly, the stakes are too high. The stakes are too high.
To now in 2024, where the noise surrounding Joe Biden's cognitive abilities has only grown louder.
We have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 million, billion dollars, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare,
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
Did it take just the presidential debate with Donald Trump for most to wake up to the already polarizing scrutiny of Joe Biden's age? Perhaps. But what we do know is, after the debate, things got much harder for the Biden administration.
I mean, it was painful to watch.
Right.
Mike. I mean, it was really difficult.
Because he's just rambling, really, isn't he?
He just absolutely buried himself. And,
Right.
and shame on Jill Biden for
Yeah.
putting him up there like that.
And I mean, what must his family be thinking? I mean, as I've said before, there's another clip which we may see later of him being led off stage at the end, and it's
painful.
like most TV studios, it's got a small kind of 3 or 4 step down to where the cameras are, and he can't walk down without 2 people holding onto him on either side.
It's really an unmitigated disaster for not just for Biden, but for the Democrats in general.
Already, someone said, this wasn't presidential. This is like elder abuse. You know, allowing this, putting this poor elderly man up in front of the world for global humiliation. Look, we can all see what's going on here. You don't need to have any background in American politics or even any kind of medical or health expertise to see what's going on here. He's a very old guy who is gradually losing his cognitive abilities. And it beggars belief, doesn't it, that Americans, that any Americans, but the Democrats continue to shore him up. And, evidently there is now panic setting in the Democrat camp. From Trump's point of view, this is a win-win. I mean, either he's got Biden, he's up against Biden, who's virtually incapacitated, or he's up against Kamala Harris, who's universally despised, as far as I can tell.
Right. If Joe Biden stays on the ticket, that is going to become more of a liability for Democrats, which is exactly why you have seen the storm around Joe Biden not subside. And as we go from the debate, the central question there, was that just a one-night, bad night debate performance? Or was this more of what we expected to see over the course of the last several years, but the White House would never confirm, and that's, does Joe Biden have more cognitive issues?
I still maintain there is no way Joe Biden is going to be on the ticket on November 5th.
Yes, it seems more and more unlikely, as I say, because it just, there were times in the past where if he had a kind of a bad day, the next time you saw him, he'd sort of be okay again. But at the moment, it seems like every time you see him, he just looks worse.
The media landscape flipped overnight. Liberal networks changed their tune.
Not great. But a lot of people have resting 25th Amendment face.
House Speaker Mike Johnson accused Democrats yesterday of helping to cover up President Biden's limitations. Cover it up? They put it on primetime. That's like saying the NFL is covering up the Super Bowl. It was clearly on TV.
The big question is whether Joe Biden will step down, but that does not look like it's happening anytime soon.
They're trying to push me out of the race. No! Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I'm staying in the race. I'll beat Donald Trump. I will beat him again in 2020.
Taco Taco!
Biden was no longer protected by left-leaning media. His botched debate had officially caused chaos globally.
The core question is whether what you saw in those few moments of the debate and over much of the arc of that 90-minute debate was someone having a difficult night or someone who is no longer up to the job. As he said on the stage in North Carolina, he wouldn't be running if he weren't confident he's up for the job.
So, with all due respect, it is not honest to say that this is just one night. There have been moments like this that people have seen in front of the cameras and other moments with cameras not there.
Tonight we have to talk about the obvious, and that is that though President Biden had a raspy voice, there were moments where he sort of stumbled a little bit to say certain things. I want to commend him for being a patriot and actually finishing the drill, sticking with the hard, sort of debate and standing up there and getting through it with the energy that it takes to do that. Yes, it was not a good night for President Biden, but I think that honestly, he is still the president of this country, and I think that Democrats are going to have a very tough conversation about ourselves going forward.
What was your personal David Plouffe take on what you saw tonight, and what are you hearing from the people you've been speaking with?
Well, I think consistent with your reaction, Rachel, and others on the panel, it's kind of a DEFCON 1 moment. I think Joe Biden, the biggest thing in this election is voters' concerns, and it's both swing voters and base voters with his age, and those were compounded tonight.
All this does beg the question, has the last 4 years caused the presidency to take such a toll, such a downward spiral on Joe Biden that he is physically and mentally unfit to serve for a second term?
Well, I think the interesting thing about watching the debate is, for somebody like myself, I wasn't really watching anything new in terms of his performance or his cognitive ability or his overall stance and demeanor. This is something that we've seen with Joe Biden over the preceding several years, and certainly during the term of his presidency. And I'm not surprised by that. I think that really what happened with the debate was that it was unedited, it was unscripted, and there was no way for him to hide behind any other facade, for lack of a better term. And I think that, unfortunately, his performance was so abysmal that there was no way that his party or his circle could deny really how he's performing.
Joe, you did such a great job. You answered every question. You knew all the facts. And let me ask the crowd, what did Trump do? Why?
If you look physically at the man, he has a lot of the hallmarks of someone that has a progressive neurological disorder, in my opinion. However, physically, the way that he walks, his facial expression or lack thereof, his seemingly cognitive disorder in the sense that he is staring off at certain points. He has a start and a stop kind of actionality. All these things coalescing together certainly have the feel of a progressive neurological disorder. If anyone were to historically pull the archive footage from 2020 or when he was on the campaign trail for his first term versus to how he is now, if you rewind the clock, you can see a stark difference. It's like a time-elapsed photo or time-elapsed video. And for sure, I think that we've seen a significant change in him. Like, everybody ages, and to say that someone is just demonstrating signs of age is maybe a little bit of a misnomer. I think that anybody who is applying for inarguably one of the most powerful positions or jobs in the world, in the free world, should probably have an intense neuropsychological examination, not just to assess their cognitive ability, but also to assess their psychological temperament to handle the rigors and the stresses and also the interpersonal difficulties with managing said job of President of the United States. But certainly after the presidential debate and the ABC News interview, I'm certainly not the first person that would call into question his ability to run. Even his own party is questioning his ability to run, or to serve, I should say. He's demonstrating physical and cognitive / mental decrement over the preceding year and a half or so. And that definitely calls into question his ability to multitask, to handle the extenuating circumstances of being in this stressful and demanding position. The fact that the White House is saying that they're scheduling the end of his day at 8 p.m. and he's not able to to function after that point. That's not the kind of person that I need, that I would want to run my country and to be there 24/7, 365. We never close. We handle everything all the time, anytime.
One thing that was really interesting after Joe Biden's disastrous debate flop is you started to see reporters publicly saying that they had heard for years that Joe Biden's feebleness and frailty was so bad that it was concerning to people in Democratic insider circles. They had been hearing that for years, and they'd been seeing it with their own eyes for years. And so I think the sense is that they missed the story. I think the sense is that this is a lesson to some extent, to paying attention to some really obvious things, that there was a big story right under their noses this entire time, and too many of them ignored it and were bullied by the White House, as they've said. They've since said the White House actually chased them off these stories, and the White House apparently did that successfully. So I think it's become a big lesson that these stories do matter, because he's the sitting president and he's clearly not capable of doing the job. And it's a reminder to journalists that these stories have real consequences for the country.
And then the unthinkable happened.
If you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
It was the shot heard around the world, and a moment that would be frozen in time, when a shooter opened fire on Donald Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania. The former president was struck in the ear by a gunman's bullet, but rose bloodied, unbowed, and defiant in the face of death. Whilst the Secret Service scrambled to protect their man, Trump stood with a roar, shouting, "Fight, fight, fight." Something that would become a rallying cry for his party. It was a sobering moment for the rhetoric of the fiery political discourse surrounding this election. Biden was criticised for his choice of words, saying days before the assassination attempt, "It's time to put Trump in a bullseye." But when he attempted to right his wrong in an interview with CNN, his inconsistency in front of a camera saw his backpedal fail.
Let's talk about the conversation this has started, and it's really about language, what we say out loud and the consequences of those. You called your opponent an existential threat on a call a week ago. You said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that.
I didn't say crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term was bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing.
For Joe Biden, after Donald Trump was almost assassinated and dodged a literal bullet just by the skin of his ear, Joe Biden now is juxtaposed with perhaps what will go down as one of the most powerful images in American history, which is Donald Trump getting up on the stage, raising his fist in the air, and already, immediately, we saw memes that juxtaposed Joe Biden falling down the Air Force One stairs, and it said Joe Biden versus stairs, alongside Donald Trump versus a bullet with his hand in the air. Joe Biden clinging to power will end up defining his legacy. He had a very long career in American politics that is now going to be capped with what looks like an increasingly successful bid by his own party to get him off the ballot. That has accelerated in the week since Donald Trump was almost assassinated. Joe Biden immediately got out and tried to be in front of all the cameras. He did one press conference immediately, then he did a couple the next day, including an Oval Office address. And even after all of that, he's trying to project calm and leadership. His party is still moving hard to push him off the ballot. You see it in all of the DC publications today, Politico. Everyone is reporting that Democratic insiders are now doubling down on their efforts to get Joe Biden off the ticket.
I think part of the problem is the advisors around him are the people who so want him to keep going, because of Biden's inability to keep up with the rigors of the job. It's a bunch of unelected advisors behind the scenes who have got so much power and therefore pushing for him to stay on in the first place. Even someone who is in really good physical health, they get knackered. They get absolutely exhausted by the rigors of the job. So I think it's frankly a bit of a minor miracle that he's made it this far. I think the problem that they've all got is that if you say that he is now not fit to run again, well, how is he still fit to continue to therefore be president for the next 6 months? How is he fit to still be president if he's not fit to run again? And then you get into the point, well, how long has he not been fit to be president for? Why was he ever fit? And these are sorts of questions, and who knew and when, that turns this potentially into a scandal of Watergate-sized proportions. And the fact that the campaign and the administration themselves are clearly not being honest only adds to that. And you've only got to see Karen Jean-Pierre, who's the White House press secretary, just clearly dodging questions, avoiding questions, and telling people things that their own eyes are now clearly showing them is just not true. you're still going to have a core of people here who are going to believe them, whatever they say, that kind of partisanship. And people who say, oh, it was deepfakes, it was deepfakes. I've met some of these people here who watch a lot of MSNBC and those sorts of shows. Well, that video of Biden just wandering off at a G7, actually he was going off to see someone else, and they'll swallow this stuff. But now we all see for an extended period in that debate that these things are not deepfakes. And unfortunately, it's a sorry state of affairs they've got themselves into with no easy way out.
It's becoming very demoralizing, I think, for the White House when you have everyone from Nancy Pelosi to Chuck Schumer to Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, now going to the president and making their case. The same thing with George Clooney, who referred to Joe Biden as a friend and just published a brutal New York Times op-ed about their long friendship, asking him to step off the ticket. That, at a certain point, becomes demoralizing. It doesn't make you dig your heels in deeper. It becomes a personal embarrassment. And I think we're kind of at that stage of what's happening to Joe Biden. And my prediction is that he will be off the ballot soon. Now he has COVID, so that'll be interesting. But even he has started to soften his stance that if he has a medical condition, maybe he'll get off the ballot. It's a different Joe Biden than we were hearing just a couple weeks ago.
The biggest challenge that Biden faces this time, which he faced to an extent last time. Remember, he was in, his late 70s. Last time, he wasn't a young man, but now at 81, with the faltering debate, unfortunately for Biden, the campaign has now centered on whether he has the mental vigor and fitness to complete a second term, a very difficult thing to refute.
Biden has been championed as someone able to bounce back from the most tragic of personal setbacks and triumph professionally. But now, with his competency being questioned, a campaign in free fall, and in the face of severe pressure from members of the Democratic Party crying out for him to step aside, not to mention the emergence of his third COVID contraction, will Joe Biden finally listen? And would it even matter anyway?